Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of the year for action items on Let's Talk Supply Chain, where we talk about everything related to digital supply chain. As always, this episode is brought to you by NewGen Architects, a digital transformation consulting agency helping businesses navigate the complex world of technology and supply chain management. The NGA team of supply chain experts works with clients in all phases of the implementation lifecycle, from initial planning to post-implementation support, including things like tool selection, project and program management, and business transformation road mapping. To learn how NGA can support your business scale, please visit www.newgenarchitects.com for more information and to schedule a free discovery session with a member of the NGA team. So, this has been a busy week. I'm here in Dubai, so I am going to keep my fingers crossed that I have a good signal to be able to talk to you guys for the next 44 minutes or so. If not, we have a wonderful guest, and I have no doubt that we will make it work and it will still be a very informative and fun show. This was not planned to necessarily be during the Big Five Global Construction Conference week, as well as COP28 Global Climate Change Conference. But it just worked out to that is what happened. And we are going to be talking about supply chain's role in the circular economy and sustainability and climate change. So without further ado, let's bring up our guest, Deborah Dull. Hello. Are you in Atlanta or are you West Coast right now? Am I telling you good morning or good afternoon?
We're going to go with good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. It is evening here, 7 o'clock. Anyone that's joining from my side of the world, especially if you join regularly, thank you very much, because Friday evening during dinner time, is probably also the time I would be spending listening to supply chain stuff, because I'm a nerd like that. Deborah, you actually met because we were spending our Saturdays nerding out on supply chain, hours and hours and hours, just talking all things supply chain. So when you love what you love what you do. But tell the audience a little bit about where you sit in the circular supply chain space, in the sustainability space. And I know here, I can see here Jim Pack, VP Sustainable Supply Chain, and we love Jim Pack. Yay. We have lots of friends at Pack. But also, I am particularly more interested in the Circular Supply Chain Network. So I am going to stop talking and hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as DC said, we did meet in the early throes of COVID, actually, when Sherry Heinisch had the fabulous idea to offer a virtual space over a weekend for supply chain professionals to come together and nerd out on the things that we love. And it was actually wildly successful. And it was a bright light in the week. So as much as this is a fun platform, and thank you for having me on, this is also a little bit of a DC Deborah catch-up. So bear with us as we compare notes, because I also want to hear a lot about construction, and circularity in that space is so massive. If we think about who uses the most material and produces the most waste in the world, it's almost always the construction industry. So we can talk a little bit about that. So how
is what I heard.
What was that?
At the conference this week, at Big Five Global. I don't remember who was on stage when she said it, but she said we have to change the perception of the industry that we are polluters and laggards. Pollution, waste, the emissions from the built environment, but also that we are slow to adopt technologies, improvements, etc. So yes, we can have a whole other show about just that.
Totally. But I think it's really interesting because I am an eternal optimist. And so I would consider you, instead of maybe a polluter, you're a fabulous source of materials for some other supply chain to use, and you haven't found that customer yet. So trying to figure out how to create these pockets, ecosystems of value that can be inspired by something called industrial symbiosis, which is where factories co-locate and actually share water and energy and heat and resources. I think that we can use that more broadly, and that's one of the concepts inside the circular economy. But you asked me who I am. So
stage at COP right now doing something. Why are you on the other side of the world? I love that. And I completely forgot that because I attended the webinar yesterday that you guys did. And I completely forgot that you mentioned exactly that from the inventory perspective, that everybody's waste almost is somebody else's inventory. They can do something else with it. And it really got me also to think about some of the different products that I've seen, even from the manufacturing space, where the raw material is the waste from another industry that's never going to go out. Like, we're never going to stop making potatoes, and they use the water left over from like making potato chips. So there's no lack of raw material, and you don't also have to think about, if you have, of course, your non-renewable materials from the earth, you're not taking those, so we're 100% off topic. And and you
It
did
took
not
us
answer
2
our.
minutes. All right, so circular supply chain network. Look, a couple of years ago, I actually, as part of a job interview process for a job I did not get, I was asked to explore the relationship between the circular economy and supply chain. And at the time, I had never heard of the circular economy, and neither really had the internet. So trying to look around and Google the two terms together, 3 total search results came up. And so while I didn't get the job, which is probably
Deborah,
worked out okay for all sides. Yes?
how long ago was this?
6-ish years. 2018. Yeah, so 6, 7, almost 7 years. So that sparked an interest in me, and I started thinking about, what does this really mean for supply chains as a tool, as a strategy, as a different way of looking at our operations. For example, something that I go back to a lot, because early in my career, I got Lean Six Sigma trained. And so I just see the world that way still. There's these wastes of lean that we know exist, like transportation and overproduction, that we just live with. We just accept that we have to transport items. That's how it works in our global economy. But we built it like this. It's taken us 100 years. We've really perfected specialization, and it's been a really good thing. We are healthier, we're living longer, we have a middle class where we didn't have one before. But what gets us here doesn't always get us there. And that's where we are. We're at this turning point of disruption from raw materials, disruption from many different inputs and areas and catalysts, as we all saw these last couple of years. And so we can start to look at another option to mitigate some of the disruptions in the waste streams, the process waste that we have, as well as the material waste. So I started researching the topic and thinking about how we can use the concepts in supply chain, and then also how we can help the circular economy come to fruition. Like, what's the role of a supply chain professional or a supply chain leader in trying to transition huge economies to embracing what circularity means? And there's one really interesting week during COVID that every once in a while you get these signals from the universe. And this is one of those weeks that almost a dozen people called me kind of out of the blue, people I hadn't heard from several months, and said, you really need to start something. And I said no every single time until Sneha called me and she said, you have to do something. And I said no again. And then I said, who's going to come if I start a thing that was essentially a space for supply chain professionals to come talk about circularity? And I said, who is going to show up to this? And then the kicker, what got me sold, is she said, Deborah, even if it's just you and me, we should start. And so that was the beginning of the Circular Supply Chain Network, which has grown humbly. We're not huge, but I've never recruited a volunteer, and I've got about 20 people all around the world who routinely give time. Everybody has day jobs. We span college hire to 30 years of experience. We span CPG to industrial. It's a really fascinating group of people. And this year, we're actually starting to launch what we're calling working groups, time-bound, scope-bound, like network for network type of working groups. So very excited to get those going. You can check out the groups that we're going to launch in January on our website. and everybody's welcome. One of those I'll give a small plug to is in partnership with ASCM, and we heard about that in the event yesterday. So they'll be launching a monthly discussion group, and I couldn't be happier. We had really wanted to bring that back. It's one of the first things that we did, but to be able to partner with an organization the size of ASCM is an absolute delight, and we're really, really excited to do that. So that's how Circular Supply Chain Network started. We are a registered nonprofit, but we're like a zero profit group of strangers who met on the internet, and our team meetings every week.
No profit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not the goal. You know, my vision for success is we actually aren't needed anymore, and we're rounding the bend, frankly, because the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has really started to embrace supply chain, and they're like the OG organization for circular economy. And ASCM has included circular supply chain in the new Score DS under OE13 and Orchestrate. I really want to make like pins and shirts and hoodies that just say like OE13 all over it. And so if those two groups continue to partner together, then, and as long as there's a public space for supply chain professionals to come together for free, then our purpose has been fulfilled. So, but our weekly meetings are really one of the highlights of our weeks, and our team members continue to meet each other around the world randomly. And so I'll do a post before the end of the year that celebrates all of the different ways that we've managed to connect. So that is a Circular Supply Chain Network. And I think that almost takes us back on topic.
Yes, I have two points. The first one is Sneha is good at roping in because she also into the modular and construction space, and here I am. We have a question on which point are you partnering with ASCM training and potential certification? Question mark.
I thank you for putting that in there, and I would love for so many of the rest of you to also recommend that in the chat as evidence that it's necessary. Actually, it'll be this monthly discussion group, so they are launching that next year. Douglas Kent yesterday said keep your eyes open for that email in January. If you're part of the very, very high number of folks that they have access to for their newsletter, you'll be getting that in the new year. So we'll also be pretty loud about it on our website and post about it, of course. I would love to build something out for training. One of the top questions I get in LinkedIn as random people reach out is, how do I learn more? How do I get trained? Where do I go? Because the circular economy content is for circular economy professionals who usually sit inside of design or sustainability. And spanning that bridge of what does it mean for our world, we still have a ways to go. But thankfully, this white paper that we had the honor to work on together with Ellen MacArthur Foundation this year has come out a couple of weeks ago, and I know we'll share the link to that during this discussion. It's called Building a Circular Supply Chain. So you can do an internet search and you'll find it. And it's great. And if you don't want to read the whole thing, even though it's like very pretty and has a lot of really good examples, there's a fact sheet that's like 4 pages that you could scan currently right now. You could open it, scan it, and be up to speed, because I know you're all very smart.
Cool. So we will put the link in the chat. I don't know if I am delayed or if you can hear me. We will put the link in the chat, and the first action item is actually, so bringing us back around full circle, no pun intended. Bringing us back around. First action item is to read the white paper. We're posting the link. Everyone can see it. And we definitely want people. I think the biggest thing, what we were talking about pre-show, and even just now talking about training, is the education. People need to know what that actually looks like. One of the things that I learned a lot that I learned about when we were doing those COVID era happy hours. Well, a couple of things actually. First thing ever is inventory. And also to be clear, so that these phrases are Deborah phrases. Everything. The cloud is a real place, or the cloud is a physical place. It doesn't just like go into the air. Our places, and they consume energy, and it looks like it is unlimited, but it's not. It is a physical space. And then we don't care, or we care very, very, very little about recycling in the concept of, in the framework of circularity. There are so many better ways to make sure that things are being used. So can you talk a little bit more about that? I know, like, reusing, repairing, build for circularity to begin with so that it's not recycled. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, and thanks, because I think this is a really important concept to cover. A lot of people hear circular economy and go straight to a recycling economy. The recycling economy has had 50 years to prove that that's a viable option, and it's not, for a lot of reasons. Mostly infrastructure isn't there to support it. It's also a challenge because when we actually recycle a material, depending on the material, the quality of it goes down. It takes a ton of energy and time and processes to take that material and put it back into a value chain. The entire economic underpinning, the theory of a circular economy, and we don't talk about the economy side enough, I think, is that an item at rest is not adding value to the economy. So instead of turns and throughput, which is how we measure success today, the idea is utilization. So to the extent that an item can be reused, we want to shorten the cycle time between users. So how do we reclaim it and get it back into a user's hand? Ideally, immediately would be a perfect state. So we have what I call the reuniverse. We have reuse, we have refurb, we have repair, we have reman. And often I just want to delete the recycle off of the what's called the butterfly diagram. You could go and do a search for that. But it does play an important role for some of the reasons that we talked about. How can we take a waste stream coming out of one factory and make it an input for another factory, for example? So that's a type of recycling, but you could also argue that it's a lower energy recycling if we don't need to melt glass down, for example, to make it into a new item. So if we start to shift our thinking where today returns, repair might be like a tiny team at the end of a hallway in your supply chain right now, imagine a world where that's actually the default. We're going to repair more than we build new. So what does that mean for our planning, for our order management, for our networks of repair vendors? What does it mean for the way that we think about control towers? How does it impact our master data? What does it mean? We're going to need to know how many times it's gone through a cycle. So having something I call a digital thread. So it's almost like a live and dynamic bill of materials, or a product passport, some people call these, as the first item. And then the other one is this idea that I like to reference out of a group called the Excess Materials Network or Excess Materials Exchange, out of Amsterdam. And they take this concept to say, look, let's look at the periodic table of uses. So recast what we need in a product that we're building by the characteristic or the use that we need that material to serve, out of how conductive is it, how hard is it, what's the chemical properties. And then we can put AI to work. So we can actually invent new materials, we can recommend different types of substitutions. And it's in this way that I think we can help to solve the recycling or waste problem. So I don't want people to walk away saying like recycling is the worst thing ever. It's not. It's an important part of this. But if we think about the butterfly diagram as in circles, or loops, as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation calls it, and the smaller the circle, the lower the effort and the lower the cycle time to get it back into a value chain. It also means the higher the margin. It's lower cost, the smaller the circle. So if we want to continue to add service level and cost mechanisms to our operations, this is one way we can start to think about doing that.
I have a couple of comments that I'm reading here, which are actually really good comments. One of them I'm going to highlight more selfishly because it takes us into action item 2. That is used more and more as an excuse these days to brush off the day-to-day waste question. Glass recycling is a great example. It rarely happens, and if it does happen, it essentially produces more carbon emissions. Adding heat, and we're not fact checking this, but circa 50% carbon on top of what's needed to make the bottle. And our second action item is about carbon emissions.
Exactly.
And the
yep.
100. So take us into that.
Amazing. So I did not plant that question, but I could have. So glass bottles are one of my most favorite examples to use in this space because, of course, we go to recycling first. But small tangent, I swear this is on topic. When I was in high school, I studied German and I did an exchange in which drinking age for beer in Germany is 16 years old. So this is an absolutely legal activity. Go to the store, you buy a beer in a glass bottle, and you pay a deposit. And it's not like for many of our states, the deposit's like you get 10 cents back if you bring this back. It's like more than the value of the beer is the deposit you pay on the bottle. So you're very motivated to bring it back. And so one day I had asked somebody, why does this bottle have this white ring around it and this bottle doesn't have? It's like a worn ring. And they told me that because of the deposit scheme and everyone brings it back, they actually take the bottle and instead of smashing it, melting it at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit and making it into a new bottle, they just wash it and refill it with beer and send it back out into the marketplace. And so that white line is what happens as it goes through the cleaning line. And this was mind blowing to me because it reminded me of like the way we used to do things with like milk delivery. And what's amazing about that is the consumer pays just as much for the product. So this is not an example of we want to do better, but we don't want to pay more for the item or lose any quality for secondhand items. Nobody actually cares the vessel that their beer comes in. So the margins are outstanding when you're able to reuse it, and it gives us an alternative that's very close to the center of that butterfly diagram. So yes, if we want to go through the effort of recycling an item that could be reused, often it is not better, hence the larger size of the circle. So in the case of a glass bottle, it's much, much better, of course, to wash it and reuse it if we can. And there are areas around the world that continue to have very strong infrastructure around this approach. And so I don't really know if I can throw that into an action item except into explaining carbon, which I can do if that's where we're going next.
Yes. And I would say yes to explaining carbon. And I will bring it up also in the context of digital. You mentioned AI. Here at Action Items, we talk about digital supply chain. And what we were talking about during the pre-show is just the number. It is so amazing to me how the marketing teams at supply chain technology companies pick up so quickly on the latest wave of whatever. It was control tower to API. Like there was a time when every vendor was reaching out to me to tell me about their API. Now every vendor is reaching out to tell me about their AI. And now I'm starting to see sustainability. We help you track your emissions. And then I say, tell me more. I mean, I know there's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Are you helping me track the emissions that my manufacturing facility is producing? Is it the transportation? Are we talking over, truckloads? Are we talking freight coming, like what are you talking? And then the answer is, oh, I'm not sure about the technology. So then that leads me to believe, well, are you actually doing it? Or is it a nice buzzword because you know that this is top of mind? But what technology do we actually have that's out there? So twofold question. Yes, explain to us more about emissions, but also give us a little bit of expert insight into who's actually doing a good job from a technology perspective to where companies can say, hey, I want to do this. I want to start tracking this. How do I do it?
Great. Okay, so this one is really interesting. And over the course of this year, I've had the chance to be on stage several times and talk about carbon flows through our supply chains. And I usually start this talk with a bottle of alcohol, usually breaking whatever policy of the conference center that I am going to. But it's very effective because I offer to give this away to anybody in the audience who can get anywhere close to telling me the carbon impact of that bottle of alcohol. And we're usually off by 100 or 1,000 times. And it shows me that our entire industry has not traditionally been engaged on the topic of greenhouse gas emissions. while at the same time, scope 3, which is typically used in a synonymous manner with supply chain, though it's not actually 100% the same thing, makes up over 90, sometimes 95% of an organization's emissions. So if we're the problem and we haven't been engaged on it, then we have some basic work to do. So if you're feeling like I don't know what the scopes are, I don't know what it is I'm doing that causes emissions, you are not alone. And we're in this together. So when I was in my last role at a company called 0100, I did a lot of research around how to decarbonize supply chains through digital technology investments. And as I tried to get my arms around what is it exactly that we're doing that's so bad, it was very difficult for me to find anything that was in supply chain language. So the last piece of research I did there, like my swan song as an analyst, was to break down the 55-ish billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we emit as a world every year. And instead of how we often see it expressed today in terms of societal needs of like mobility and housing, which are all very important, I broke it down in functions of supply chains. How do we source and make and move? And then if we think about the use half of the supply chain, how do we sell it? How do we use it? And so that exists, that is still public, I think. And the rule of thumb for the world is it's about a third into materials. So the materials that we bring into our supply chain, more or less a third of the problem. That might be metals, that might be something made from animals, that might be something grown in a field. We have some influence over this. We have more influence than we've ever had before. So if you are in that part of your supply chain, working together with your R&D teams, this could be a great place for you to focus. Then we have about a third, that's the energy used throughout our supply chains. Almost all of that, 80-ish%, is factory floor energy sources. And the other slice is what we use in our transportation and logistics, from vehicles to cross docks to warehouses. But the majority is this manufacturing factory floor energy source. So
we can kind of loosely high level say procurement and sourcing, production, transportation, if we had to kind of break it down.
For 2/3. So 1/3 materials, 1/3 energy, we'll call it manufacturing, and 1/3 is in product use, which again, depending on your role in your supply chain and your product, you may not have a lot that you can do to influence how a user is using your product. Unless you do a B2B, an asset that sits on another factory floor, then you've got more influence around how that item is used. So that's rule of thumb. Now you can start to imagine how your pie chart might change depending on your product. So for example, if your product has an on switch or requires energy in any way, so like soup that needs to be heated up, tea that the water needs to be boiled, or if it's like a incense plug-in into the wall, then probably product use is your highest pie slice, because energy is the vast majority of the world's emissions. So you can start to get curious about what your biggest slice is, and it's harder than it seems like it should be. But that resource exists. We're going to share the link to it. So you can go and click straight into your functional area where you sit, and it goes down a level of detail so you get more understanding about what it is that we're doing that causes this problem. So then you can start to go, okay, if that's the problem, here's a few ways that you can start thinking about the role of digital and starting to reduce the emissions coming out of your value chain.
Yes, I love all of that. That was, I mean, applause, yay. I love it specifically. And you know what is really interesting? I feel like everything that we're talking about, we've only been talking not even 30 minutes, because I did an intro. I'm watching, the time. But isn't there a saying that you don't truly understand something until you can explain it easily? And one of the first question that I had was, okay, well, what does that mean? And then you very simply explain, you take the plug-in incense, you plug it in. How long does that last? What is the energy that is being consumed while the user is using it? And I will say, I personally believe that as the product, I mean, I'm not in product development, but when you're developing a product, you can heavily influence how users are using it, and I feel like that's one of the things, if we think about, lean and, the different types of waste. And as we even think about from a manufacturing facility perspective, foolproofing things, and making sure that, hey, you design something to influence human behavior. So if we start to think about how do we influence behavior so that people are using our products in the best way, we can have more influence perhaps than what we think. So I see the link is in the comments to the 0100 research. And the second action item was leverage that. I would like to add an action item. Jordan, you don't have to scramble to put it on the screen. But I mean, definitely like get involved with the circular supply chain network, go and share ideas. I think the thing that I love most about conferences is that you feel like you're seeing the latest and greatest, and you're interacting with like minds. But you don't have to go to a conference to get that. And I think that just when people know the community is out there, that they can get, more education, get involved. It's almost like build it and they'll come. Well, build it, tell people about it, and then you know, build it, market it, and then people will come. So action item is definitely to get involved. There's a wealth of knowledge and information. I mean, just I cannot imagine the lift it was for you to analyze all of the data and try to find reliable sources of data. Like that was a lot. Do I want to know how much work it?
No, probably not. It was a very, very large piece of research, and data sources are all included in the paper. It is a lot of assumptions, of course. I did not go and place sensors around the world, but it was all done combining supply chain data with emissions data and trying to make sense of it. So taking apart the transportation industry, for example, and figuring out what's actually supply chain and what's humans, human movement, human cars, human flying, human rail versus the world that we use, whatever it is. And so that was actually kind of complicated, but managed to break that down. And it's interesting because I just got a chance to spend this week with my colleagues in my day job, in the Genpack job, and we talked a lot about exactly the day job, the night job, and I'm also in school because why not? That we all feel really bad about flying, for example, and I don't think we should all go hop on planes, and that's not what my message is, but looking at the data, it puts it into perspective on where we can have the biggest impact as supply chain professionals. If you sit in logistics, it probably is going to be reduce your air freight. But if you work in strategic sourcing or in supply planning, and you have a hand in deciding where something comes from, then you should know the energy mix that supports that geographical area. Even from a high level, you can make a better decision and work better with your suppliers on these. I find that sometimes and I understand we're supply chain professionals, we want to really understand our data from the bottoms up so that we can analyze it, we can optimize it, we can go Six Sigma it, all of that. And I'm finding that some people get stuck trying to figure out what exactly is my baseline so that I can go and tinker and optimize and know if I've hit my 20% reduction goal that somebody at corporate set for me. Also, though, we do actually have an issue we need to solve. Like we do actually need to dramatically reduce emissions. And so if we have a good idea of where we need to start, then just go get started.
Just go do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just go do it. And one thing that you mentioned earlier about the passports, and then we have a comment from Gerald. There are some interesting digital solutions supporting the transition to asset as a service, IoT, cloud, AI. Are you keeping us on pins and needles? What are they? Can you share them? They exist. Who are they? We would like to know. Put them in the comments, please. Thank you, for the rest of the world to see. but also, he mentions the financial incentives for both producers and users of the assets. But aside from the financial incentives, and going back to the passport comment, government regulations are coming up. And what we're seeing also in the manufacturing space, and supplier development, having conversations there, is that a lot of, if you're doing contract manufacturing with a large multinational corporation, a lot of them now are within our supply chain. We are tracking this data. You are part of our supply chain, so you must now track this data. So it's one of those things. And I was talking to, I think I maybe was texting with Sherry about this a couple of weeks ago. I was like, it's so funny because I very specifically remember in 2020 that we had a question. There was a conversation around how do we get the C-suite to care about sustainability within the supply chain, about the circular economy. And now it's like, I need everything about the circular economy and sustainability. I mean, in such a short span of time, it's become that we must know what this is, whether it's, we actually care about saving ourselves. And one thing that I really liked that I heard this week here in Dubai was, we don't need to save the world. The world has been around for many, many years. The world has gone through a lot. The world will regenerate itself. We have to ourselves. Like, we are the thing that is, like, we have to think about how do we make life better for ourselves. So whether companies are doing it because they genuinely care, whether they are doing it because of consumer pressure, or whether they are doing it because of government restrictions, this is something that you have to put on the radar. It has to become more than just a conversation, and it has to be more than, oh, I don't actually know how the technology works, let me get back to you on it. So with that said, I'll get off my soapbox. The time is winding down, and I definitely want to talk more about the third, or the last action item, because we added one in there. Mark your calendars. Next week, in just a couple of days, you are going to have another webinar related to this topic. So everyone here will then go there and take notes. We will also put the registration link in the comments, but tell us more about that webinar.
Absolutely. And you actually queued it up really well. Look, value chain, we know that the special thing about supply chain, I think, is that nobody's in charge. We are a series of independent companies all hooked together in a chain or a network or whatever visual works for you. And we know we have to engage our extended value chain if we want to do something transformational. And that is not different in this case, or when we have to comply with upcoming regulations. And I'd add another flavor of that regulational pressure for the C-suite is that the direction that we're seeing the regulation go in at first is, you need to tell me about the high carbon materials moving through your supply chain, or you need to tell me about all of the emissions from your extended supply chain if you want to continue doing business in my geographical area. And then I predict that there will be the second phase of, thank you very much for showing me an auditable carbon flow. Now this is the tax or a levy or whatever we're going to call it, but we will get charged for the amount of carbon that's flowing through our value chains. What that looks like, nobody really knows, but it's there and it's going to hurt. And that's the point of regulation, is if they don't design it properly, it doesn't change any behavior. So there's this financial risk to our businesses and margins that we need to start getting ahead of. So how do we start doing that? On Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern, I just posted about this yesterday, so it should be relatively easy to find, and it's in the link, so thank you very much. Two really, really advanced supply chains. I'm super delighted that they agreed to spend some time with me. Nico DeGolia from Microsoft, we had the wonderful chance to present together at a podcast for ASCM in September. And he has so many facts and examples, but then also very practical ways to engage your stakeholders and to engage your extended value chain. He was actually a partner of Microsoft before he came in, so he's got a really interesting story. which I'm sure he's going to share quite a bit of on Monday. The other guest is Iskander from Philips. Philips is really known as a leader in the circular economy space. They are like a founding member of every possible collaborative group that has to do with circularity. And in speaking with him a few times, he's got also really good examples of how circularity and carbon come together, how they also speak with teams across their organizations, because I'm keen to dig into, is it everybody at the organization is really understanding what's going on, or are there a couple of pockets? So please do join us. I think it's going to be a really, really good conversation. And then you should walk away. One of the asks I've got for both of them is, let's leave people with actionable go forward plans or rule of thumbs or stories or techniques or examples to take back to their teams right away.
And I love that. And I love it because it's very, I feel like it's very overwhelming to think about, oh my goodness, we have to do all of these things now. And not to use like a trite consulting term, but, don't boil the ocean. Start piece by piece. It's the progress over perfection. 1% of progress every day will get you, eventually to where you need to go. So I think it's really important for people to not feel overwhelmed and just taking those practical, tiny little steps. So I highly encourage everyone to look at that. We did have another comment.
Amazing.
And we might go a little over, but don't you think that, and this is actually, there are two comments, but I have to pick one because we only have a little bit of time. Don't you think there is also a big role of education at school, as kids are a very good vector? Do you think involving teachers in some meetings of circular economy?
The shortest answer is, of course, yes, we have to. The longer answer is, we are also not off the hook. We don't have time. If we were to start in primary schools, by the time they are decision makers and policymakers, I don't want to say it's too late, but like I don't sign up to this 2050 situation. Like I am a delicate flower. I don't want to live in a world that is super hot and has bad food and no ice for my martinis and I get sunburned all the time. Like, I am personally motivated to be physically comfortable. So yes, we need to. And then we also need to educate those in universities. I do a lot of guest lectures. I've contributed to a few brainstorming on actually including circular supply chains into curriculum. Changing curriculum in universities takes a few years often. And then there's, of course, the professional side, which takes us back to the comment about ASCM certification. And we do need to get there. And the nice thing, and maybe this is, DC, to your point, I've been sitting in this space for so long, so it's just kind of stuck in my head. It's not actually rocket science. Like, this is, to me, an extension of lean thinking. So if you have not been trained in lean or root cause or problem solving, that's a good place to go and start. And then we are going to look at our supply chains in a slightly different way to look for a different type of flow. We already know how to find physical flow. Sometimes visibility is a challenge, but let's go with it here. So we can see physical flows. We can see information flows, because the thing doesn't move unless the thing tells it to move. So your world on digital, and how do we create these ecosystems to be a catalyst for action? And of course, there's the financial flows, because otherwise none of it actually works. And we need to add a fourth flow, this carbon flow. And you could think about material flow. So in material, I break that. Today we have value streams and waste streams. Tomorrow we'll just have value streams. The waste streams are either going to be eliminated or sold on to a new type of customer. And so we can start thinking about the flows that go through our networks, which we should already be pretty comfortable imagining. So yes, we need education. There are a number of conversations happening in this space today. And this is an and scenario where we all need to get a little bit smarter.
Absolutely. And we are like right on schedule. We've got seconds left. Thank you so much for all of the comments, honestly, and also keeping the conversation going and the engagement. Thank you for the work that you do, Deborah. Thank you for joining me on this Friday. And that concludes today's show, everyone. Thank you for listening and supporting the show these last few years. This is our last episode. But if today's content resonated with you and you are seeking hands-on support for your business to talk about how to leverage digital technologies to figure out your circular supply chain framework for your company, visit nugentarchitects.com and schedule a free discovery session with a member of the team. And you can always catch the recordings as well on YouTube. And be sure to sign up for the newsletter. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.